Hello, I'm Rabyd, otherwise known as the Rabyd Atheist, a former pastor turned atheist, now a compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. Feel free to like or dislike the video as you see fit, so feel free to hit those buttons. Feel free to comment below, and I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel and hit your notification bell for more content as it is released. You're also free to share my videos as much as you like. The purpose of this channel is educational in regards to atheist and deconversion issues. You already read the thumbnail, you already looked at the title, you know that we're talking about whether or not there is a middle ground. And to do this, I have to revisit an issue that I visited a couple days ago, because I was playing what I was attempting to do in that video about abortion, because of the recent Supreme Court concerns, is can I lay out the argument that's pro-life without any religious connotations, and does it have any value or merit? In that video, I asked a lot of questions. I think a couple commenters took it as that's the position that I was taking, and I'm not taking a position yet. I'm still very much engaged in an internal discussion as well as many other things. The one thing I can tell you this is it's not an easy issue, and it's a lot more complicated than people like to think. Because it's interesting that even people that are right-leaning, for instance, some of them will say, yeah, no, in the cases of rape and incest, but at that point you're making an exception. Is it human life or not? The issue for me is, can middle ground always be achieved? And the answer to that, I think, is an obvious no. I don't think middle ground can always be achieved, but I asked the question whether there is a middle position on this, where there is a compromise position. And the thing about politics is you have to figure out a compromise position. I think the real problem and why nothing goes forward at all anymore is in America, the two political factions really are so diametrically opposed, they don't cooperate with anything anymore. And if they do, you're trying to figure out how it benefits everybody, and usually the parties rather than the citizenry sometimes. So you have to be watchful of that. So is there a middle ground on the issue of abortion? And I'm going to conclude at this present time, no. But I also have to say that both sides have a little bit of an argument ahead of them. The pro-life, one of the people said, well, you know, we're talking bodily autonomy of the woman here. Okay, agreed. People have bodily autonomy. People shouldn't be forced to engage in anything that is against their will. You know, the argument is that a woman shouldn't be forced to carry something that she doesn't want to carry. She shouldn't have to bring to term a pregnancy that she doesn't want to. Okay. Well, I'm going to give as best I can the counter to that, which is actually multifold without any religious connotations. Number one, what makes her have bodily autonomy over a fetus? Because the argument goes, well, it's part of her body or it's inside her body. Those seem to be the two things that come out. And the first one is it's part of her body. Now, what do you mean by that? Okay, how would we determine if something was a part of a person's body? Probably the best way is DNA testing. We would test the cells. We would examine the DNA, and if the DNA is part of a sample we don't know, and we compare it to something we do know, yep, that's part of the woman's body because it has the same genetic structure. The problem is the fetus doesn't have that. A fetus has half the mother's genetic code and half the father's. It really truly is unique. If somehow in some way the fetus could commit a crime and crime scene investigators were investigated, they would not conclude that the mother did it. They would conclude that a child of the mother did it. So that doesn't, I don't know, there may be a weakness there. So what do you mean by part of her body? Well, I'm not sure it's part of her body. Well, what about inside? Okay, if I fire a gun and the bullet goes into a woman and lodges inside of her, does that make it part of her body simply because it's inside of her? No. If, you know, during sex, a certain organ goes into another organ of a woman, while it's inside of her, is it part of her body? I don't know. Inside her body or part of her body, I think we need a little bit better definitions if we're going to talk about bodily autonomy here. Because the argument from the pro-life position becomes, Okay, we're arguing for bodily autonomy too. We're arguing for bodily autonomy of a fetus who, through no fault of its own, finds itself in peril and having its bodily autonomy in jeopardy of death. Okay, and we are speaking for that which cannot speak. I've heard that argument. There's nothing theological about that argument. Okay, that's a human rights question. So it really comes back to this. I don't think the part of her body or inside of her body are very good arguments. I don't think, on the other hand, that maybe bodily autonomy really helps the issue, because I don't think it solves the problem on either side. One's claiming the bodily autonomy of the woman, the other one's claiming the bodily autonomy of the unborn child, in their view. Okay, so what do we have left? I think the real issue is to find out whether or not a fetus has any capacity as a human being. And that becomes the real struggle for me. That becomes the real part of it. How do we determine that? And I think that's really the whole muddy part of the issue. At what point does a fetus become a human being? Okay, and so the argument becomes a sliding scale. I got a strong reaction about the 12 weeks thing. The 12 weeks thing is more of a political thing than anything else, because you can get a number of people to get on board with the idea that a woman has about 3 months to make up her mind on whether she wants to keep a pregnancy. After that, she has to, because, you know, nothing past 12 weeks. And anybody who's ever watched a video of a partial birth abortion, sorry, I'm going to call murder on that one. I've seen partial birth abortions, and when the child is crying as you kill it, and simply because it's halfway still inside of its mother, but it's not part of its mother because it has its own genetic code, yeah, I think you have a problem. And anybody who's seen that, yeah, I question, if you can say that that's okay, I question your humanity. Okay, I really do. I question your empathy. So at what point on this sliding scale does a person become self-aware and become human? And I think that's a better question. And the problem is, I don't know if we have a good answer for that one. And I don't know if we have a good middle ground for it either. I don't think middle ground is possible here, and I don't think we have a good answer. And that's the problem. So it comes back to legalities. Who is the person that should make the decision about that? Who is the person that ultimately should make the choice about that? Well, I don't know. I really don't know. I think the mother definitely has some say in it, but is she the only one? This has brought up a lot of cases, like, you know, men have sued because they said, no, it's not just her decision, it should be mine too. That's my child, and I believe it's alive. So, you know, it's like, oh, well, so what? He doesn't take the risk. Yeah, but he'll sure as hell pay the child support if you decide to have it, won't he? You know, that's another issue entirely. But we're trying to determine here, is there any middle ground? And I don't think there is. But I also don't think that there's any really good answers yet. And until science can truly determine when something becomes conscious, where it has a limited form of consciousness, then as a human would have consciousness, I think we have a problem. And what side do I want to err on? Now, I had all this discussion, okay, and it's more of an illustration. I don't think, personally, I still think that the best route, given what we know, is for a woman to make the choice about what happens to her pregnancy. But at the same time, I really think it's only fair to make sure that you have this discussion with, if possible, with the person who fathered the child. Because it's, you know, if you're going to make them responsible, at least make them responsible for responsible for the decision. In the end, the decision is still the woman's, but, you know, I think it's only decently human to talk to the person who fathered the kid. Now, if it was, you know, the result of a bunch of whoops stuff, or, yeah, you just don't know who the father is, I guess you're on your own. But, you know, there's a lot, you know, what I don't like to see is when people really, in my mind, like, dude, or dudette, you know, do you have any empathy, any humanity here? Because that's what I'm beginning to wonder. It's a very deep and I think a very important decision when a woman has to make it. At this point, that's where I'm at, but I think the waters are a lot more muddy than the pro-choice or the pro-life people would like to make it. I think they want to make it too black and white, and while I don't think there is any good middle ground, I also don't think that either position is completely ironclad. And so, once again, we're dealing with humans, so that's kind of the way it usually is. I say all this to illustrate a point of why in deconversion we have to think through these issues again. Because the temptation is to run from your faith, especially if your faith was like a cult or something. You want to get away from everything a part of it. And I'm sorry, no side in any issue is completely wrong, and no side is completely right. When I talk about the echo chamber, and I want to address this because it was a good comment, when I talk about a person being in an echo chamber with their religion, it means they're not taking any input or thoughts from outside of that box, okay? You can still be, everybody has their prejudices, but you can be prejudiced and outside of an echo chamber, still searching for information. You're still listening to other sides. You're still looking at different information. Whereas a person in their echo chamber doesn't do that. They're prejudiced, and they're completely prejudiced because they're not even allowing outside, but what if, or have you considered, to even come in. A good example of this is any Christian fundamentalist group where you're only allowed to watch Christian TV, you're only allowed to listen to Christian radio, you're only allowed to read Christian books, listen to good Christian music, go to Christian events or whatever. You're not allowed to step outside that box. You have to date and marry Christian people. You have to, it's like there's nothing you can do outside of that. And that is an echo chamber. Whereas, I'm prejudiced. I have my own bias, for instance, against the woke crowd, but that's because I've listened to them. I've listened to the counter to them. I've talked to some of them, and I've gotten information. I haven't, what are you trying to do here? And I think the problem with the woke crowd is they had very noble intentions, but like so many things that went off the fucking rail. And that's the problem, okay? When things go off the rail, you have to point out that they went off the rail. I feel the same way about a lot of different groups. I think a lot of Second Amendment right groups look like a bunch of nut jobs because they act like a bunch of nut jobs, and that's because they've gone off the rail. They haven't stuck with the political ideological issue of why that exists. Free speech advocates, you can be a free speech absolutist until, you realize that means there's going to be porn, there's going to be whatever a person wants to do is classified as free speech needs to be in there. So you can, you've got to address those issues. How do you address those constructively without being totalitarian? On the flip side, we got, people that want to force their ideologies on other people. So you don't have good answers. And as a deconverted person, I have to rethink these, and I make the argument, and I hear the argument from the other side, and if I may think if it's weak, I'll try to steel man it. Okay, is there a way to improve this argument? Why do I do all that? Because I don't want to fall into the same trap of just simply changing one religion, a faith-based religion, for a politically based religion. Because to me, when you have politics and religion, it's all about fear and control and making people do what you want them to do. And it doesn't matter whether there's a political motivation or a religious motivation or frickin' both in some cases, like Christian nationalists here in the United States, definitely religious and politically motivated. And they're a cult. Okay, whenever you get into a cult mind, you're dangerous. Okay, and the best defense against that is to actually frickin' listen to the other side, consider what they have to say, make the argument yourself, maybe even steel man it, and then try to find a better way. If nothing else, you may find a better way to argue against it. I think so many people lose their ability to persuade others because they don't even bother to think of how they can present this better and do a better job. And we don't have good discussions anymore. We just have people screaming at each other. And that's a real problem because it doesn't really do good. Free speech, in my opinion, is good for society as long as we're not screaming at each other and throwing rocks. Okay, it's when you decide to engage in stupidity that becomes a real issue. My whole point is when you're deconverting and you've come out of this crap, be very careful that you don't fall back into the crap. Okay, but it's just a different pile. Okay, it's just a different pile that somebody else crapped. Okay, you can go from one echo chamber to another, and another big difference is if you're really trying to stay out of it, make sure you defend people's right to speak. Okay, you may vehemently disagree with, think they're racist, bigoted homophobes, but you should still let them speak, because if that's true, their own speech is going to end up destroying them. Okay, it's not a question of karma. It's a question when people start listening to nut jobs, they begin to realize, hey, this guy's a nut job. And, some people don't, but a lot of people do, and they shy away from it. When people ask me, why certain politicians lost or win, I says, well, because either their opponent or they was able to point out the nut jobbery of the other side. So, or they were simply nut jobs and it was easy to defeat them. You have to remember that you're still stuck on the planet with all these people and you still got to live with it. And I do believe that one verse of scripture makes a valid wisdom point, if it's not necessarily inspired, but as much as possible, live in peace with all men. And to me, as a libertarian, that makes a lot of sense. I'm not trying, I'm a compassionate anti-theist. So when I talk to theists, I'm not trying to destroy them or scream at them. And if they're pro-life, I've got to engage their pro-life arguments. I can say, hey man, don't talk to me about the created in the image of God. That's a theological concept I don't accept. Oh, well, let's talk about bodily autonomy. Okay, we can have that discussion. And there's a big difference between the two. Well, once again, thank you for stopping by. I appreciate you stopping by here. Every like, share, and subscribe goes a long way to helping the channel. Every comment, of course, gets the YouTube algorithm going, so feel free to comment below. It's always a joy. And hopefully I can convince you to be a rabid atheist like myself. In the meantime, this is Ed Rabyd, also known as the Rabid Atheist, signing off and wishing you a good day.